Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Dyrenfurth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. G'day, Curtinistas. Welcome back to episode 2 of 2026 Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast of politics, culture and ideas, co-hosted, co-sponsored with Redbridge Group. Today, we're talking about global political turmoil, the spike in right-wing populism, and the future of social democracy and centre-left politics. Welcome to my co-host who's fighting out of Melbourne's marginal seats in the West. He's weighing in with more crosstabs than a Saturday night election count. He's undefeated in the dark arts of democratic drift. He's the Don of Data, the Salt, the Swing, the Master of Marginals, the Prince of Preferences, Redbridge El Supremo, Kung Fu Cos Samaras. Welcome, Cos.
Hello, mate. How are you?
We've got a rip snort of a guest today, Cosy. Really excited for this one. We're going to be talking about many of the issues that we've chatted and talked through at an Australian domestic scale, but now on a global, with a global lens, the fragmentation of politics, de-alignment, realignment from major parties, the collapse of the mainstream centre-right, and the revolt, the generational revolt amongst millennials and Gen Z, which is upturning politics everywhere. And few people have seen these forces play up close and personal, in and out of government. Well, one man who has is Alastair Campbell. Alastair Campbell is one of the most influential political strategists of the modern era. He served as Director of Communications to UK Prime Minister Tony Blair and played a central role in successive Labor election victories, 3 in fact, and the remaking of British social democracy in government. Since leaving frontline politics, Alastair has become a prolific author, diarist. I read his recent diary last week, Cosy, you should too, and mental health advocate. Co-host of The Rest is Politics podcast, the #1 political podcast in the world. We are excluding Joe Rogan. And a sharp, unsparing commentator on the state of democracy, populism and leadership around the world. He remains one of the clearest voices on what governing actually demands. Alastair Campbell, welcome to Curtin's Cast.
It is a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Al, let's start with a really simple question. What on earth is going on in the United Kingdom? I sort of digest a fair bit of British politics and mainly through the New Statesman. If there are any New Statesman editors there, you need to up your game with your Australian coverage. We do actually share the same king. You've got up the quality there, but I read the New Statesman and it just seems to be a total mess. And I want to dig deep into the influence of reform and the threat to Keir Starmer's government from the left in the Greens. What is going on with Keir Starmer's Labor government?
Okay. Well, first of all, if you want to get, I think The Rest is Politics does more in Australia than the New Statesman. So, you can be negative about the New Statesman or you can be positive about The Rest is Politics, entirely up to you.
I love the New Statesman. I love the New Statesman.
Yeah, it's okay. Look, I think you've got to track back a little bit. I mean, Keir Starmer right now, I agree, it's kind of strange that he's gone from a 3-figure landslide majority to a position now where he's just survived a kind of what felt like an existential moment, and there may be more to come. I think that British politics has gone through a very, very strange phase for some time. I think I'm right in saying that the last British Prime Minister who won an election and then went on to serve a full term was Tony Blair, which is quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
And, we've had this churn of Conservative prime ministers, and then Keir Starmer comes in and he's promising stability and grown-up politics. And now it sort of sometimes feels like we're back where we were. I think part of it is just how difficult politics generally has become.
Yeah.
I think the public are more demanding. I think there's less kind of automatic respect for politicians, and you can say, well, they deserve it, but they don't all deserve it. But that's the kind of general mood. You've seen something very similar with Albanese. I mean, I really like your guy. I think he's, he was a very good guest on The Rest Is Politics, and I love the world's #1 podcast apart from Joe Rogan. That's brilliant. But he, I don't think there's anywhere that politics right now in the democratic world is easy or straightforward. I'm probably one of the few people who thinks that actually Keir Starmer is probably going to survive a lot longer than people think, because ultimately, you mentioned reform. It's interesting. Look, Labour. I'm not pretending that Labour's poll ratings are good; they're terrible. But we're starting. I think I said on the podcast a few weeks ago, I think we've hit peak reform, and I really believe that.
Yeah.
I think they're starting to get greater scrutiny. And hopefully that will, over time sort of see their wings substantially clipped. But look, around the world, democratic politics is in a bit of a state. And one of the reasons for that, I've felt for some time now, that the battle that is taking place, if we're not careful, is not a battle between left and right, it's a battle between democracy and autocracy.
Yes.
And we're seeing that in America. We've obviously seen it. We see Russia and China. They're now much more kind of open about saying, listen, you guys, why are you so hung up on democracy? It's not working for you. And those who are fighting for democracy and who sort of continue to have a romantic attachment to the belief that, democracy might be better than dictatorship, it's a struggle right now. And I guess the other thing for Keir Starmer, we talked a lot on the podcast about this, what we call the Ming-Val strategy. It was a very cautious strategy to get into power. And essentially, Labour won a landslide, yes, in part on Keir Starmer projecting a sense of being sensible, mainstream and all that stuff. But, he knows that the really big reason for the landslide was the fact that people would just stick to death with the Tories and wanted rid of them. And then what I feel hasn't yet happened is the sense of a clear, powerful, compelling narrative that says to people, yeah, times are tough. Yeah, I get, it's all a bit difficult at the moment, but I can see where we're going. And I think unless you've got that in modern politics, I think the one who's got it at the moment that I can point to where I really feel he's showing how it's done in a way, and is Mark Carney in Canada. Now he was lucky in a way because of course Trump was the pivot that led to Carney coming into politics on the back of Trudeau, but he's really got a sense of direction. There's a clear, every time you see the guy, you kind of have a sense of what he's about and what he's trying to do. And that's, I think, what modern political leadership has to be.
You're right. I mean, Albo snapped the cycle. That cycle, the revolving door prime ministership, which you've seen in the UK, Albo snapped that last year. Albo was the first prime minister to be re-elected in 21 years since John Howard.
Yeah.
In 2024. So again, this is where I like to call out the Australian exceptionalism. I don't want you to take pot shots at Keir Starmer, but I do read the New Statesman, a terrific journal of political thought. But I've noticed that ever since he came to power, there's been this subterranean debate, and maybe it's just something which the intellectual class, the political class is interested in. Almost from day one, what is this Labor government for? What is Starmerism? And I think he infamously came out and said, there is no such thing as Starmerism. How much of the sort of rolling crises and sense of there's a lack of sort of narrative bringing all the sort of they're clearly a busy government, like the Albanese government was in the 3 years leading up to last year's election, but there's not something sort of bringing it together as a coherent whole. How much of that is on Starmer, but how much of it is the Labor Party as an institutional force, and how much of that is, broader forces which are tearing up the old political script?
I mean, I think there's definitely something about Keir that he doesn't. You got to remember he's pretty late to politics. He was a lawyer, then he's director of public prosecutions, and relatively, for an MP, he came into Parliament fairly late. There's a part of him, I think, that doesn't like a lot of what modern politics has become. He sort of thinks that, we've got to be, it's a serious job, you've got to do serious stuff. And he doesn't particularly like doing all the kind of media stuff that you have to do. So I think partly it's him and partly it's his character and his personality. But I think that just the pace of politics and the acceleration that social media has injected into politics, I think is a factor. And also, look, we did a series on the podcast recently about the impact of Rupert Murdoch on politics around the world. We have a very you have a biased media, we have a very biased media. And what I'd say is that almost from day one, Keir has not had a break. Now, they've made mistakes, don't get me wrong. So, for example, one of the first things that happened after they came in, we had the longest gap between an election and a budget ever. Now, that was because they were, getting in and looking under the bonnet and trying to sort things out. And then they discovered that the public finances were even worse than we'd expected. And so the first budget, the big thing, they were taking away the winter fuel payments for pensioners. That was, I've always said, if you're going to make your first big battle with pensioners, you better be sure of your ground. So that was difficult. But then also what it meant was that between the election and the first budget, we had all this other stuff filling the gap. So there was this stuff about a business guy who was buying Keir Starmer's specs and his clothes and they were getting free tickets for stuff. Now, compared with the scandals that we're seeing on an hourly basis in the United States of America, which is now sort of brazenly, openly corrupt country, this was like nothing. But in our context, where he's been a bit the guy who says we're going to clean up politics, we're going to be, better than the last guys, then it became a kind of it became almost semi-defining. It's not defining in that it's not going to sort of set the course of the government, but it became presentationally and strategically a little bit defining. And then I think what's happened is that as they've gone along, you take something like, as you probably know if you listen to the podcast, I'm obsessed with Brexit, total disaster for the country. And I think the country is coming to accept that. Labour's been very, very cautious about how you address that. So that to me is where there might be a big compelling narrative, but they haven't yet got to it. I think they're getting to it. Keir made a speech in Munich last week at the Munich Security Conference where he's, because of what's gone on in Russia, Ukraine, because of what's happened with Trump. So I think it's partly that. But then when you mention the party, you've got to remember that this huge majority, a lot of new MPs, and they've only known this part of their parliamentary career. They've come in on a landslide.
Yeah.
And I think some of them, they don't understand that just because you've got a landslide doesn't mean that sometimes you have to do really difficult things. And then you have to go back to your constituencies and argue for them. And what's happened is that quite a lot of things, the government has come out and said, we're going to do this. The MPs have voted for it. And then there's been a kind of rebellion against it. And then the government has backed down. And that, again, has set a pattern that has made people feel, I'm not, because your earlier point, I'm not sure what they're about. Now, I still think there's time to fix this because, we don't have your ridiculous 3-year terms. Which I've never ever understood, and I've never understood why you can't change it. But anyway,
well, our states changed now. Our states pretty much
true.
All moved to 4 years. I get.
Yeah, but I don't think
the punters will cop 5, mate. But the 4's a nice happy medium, isn't it, Cozzy?
It is, yeah, that's right. I think what we're seeing here is also a combination of, I would say, the period between the GFC and when Starmer was elected. The same applies with Albanese, where you could also say that was an incredibly volatile period politically in the UK. with that constant churn of leaders through the Conservative Party as well, in particular. So during that period, obviously, we've had a dramatic decline in living standards outside the big cities. And, whenever you look at, okay, where's reform doing really well, it's the tag right next door, post-industrial. Everywhere where you look in the UK where they're doing well, it's some form of economic decline during a period where the political leadership of the country seemed to be having a blue with themselves. Same applied in this country as well. And so you come, Albanese has got the same problem, but it's actually hitting the centre right here in this country now. It's not hitting him, and we can talk about what that looks like. But those voters in Australia are the same. They're outside the big cities. They've experienced significant economic personal decline, and they've had enough. And they're basically saying, right, what's your plan? Because I'm done waiting. You seem to be, as in you, Albanese or Starmer, seem to be the mature adult. What is your plan? And I think him not coming out with a narrative that was strong to give them some hope, they've just gone running to the arms of reform.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something in that, and there's no doubt at all. I mean, I felt at the moment I'm in France at the moment, but in the UK, Channel 4 are doing this 3-part series on Tony Blair and, quarter of a century on, as it were. And one of the things that I think we didn't do well, and this isn't me speaking with hindsight, because we used to have this argument at the time. I think we got a little bit caught up on the sense that globalization was going to be good for everybody. And I don't think we were quick enough to understand that there was a downside. There were massive upsides to globalization, but there was a big, and particularly for a left of centre party that has always been struggling historically to be trusted on the economy. So we tilted that. We were way more trusted on the economy than the Conservatives by the time, we were in the middle of our period in office. But I think that we never really open and we didn't educate people about the potential downsides and argue for the changes that might be needed for that. And so I think that is what has in part led to Brexit, led to Trump, led to this kind of wave of populism. It's what's allowed the kind of Trumpian elite, and it makes me laugh the way they sort of, not laugh, it's sick, the way they present themselves as the kind of voice of the man of the people. These are people who have spotted this seismic change in our politics and are exploiting it to enrich themselves, to empower themselves, and so forth. But there's no doubt that is what helped them to do it. And I think that we're also, trapped in a very conventional form of political communication and campaigning. We're still in this model of vote for me and you'll have a good health service, you'll have good schools, you'll get a job. There's very little bigger argument, and this is again what Trump. I've got to warn you. Whenever I talk about Trump, my hands go like this.
Blood pressure going up. Oh.
I can't stop it. I start to mimic him, but so he's in my head. I openly admit this.
They call it Trump derangement syndrome. Trump derangement syndrome.
I've definitely got it.
You got it.
We interviewed 100%. We interviewed Gavin Newsom in Munich the other day, and he actually said to me, he says, "You have got really bad TDS." So I have a little bit, but the thing is, I think you have to, because he has been. I think he's a terrible president, a terrible human being, but he's, by his own lights, he's phenomenally successful. Okay, so you have to try to learn from that. And what does he do that the others aren't doing? Now, first of all, it helps to be the president of the United States, because that gives you a kind of a volume that the others struggle to get. And I wouldn't ever want an Albanese or a Starmer or a Carney or a Macron. I don't ever want them to go down the route of industrial lying and bullying and all that stuff. But what I think he does get is an understanding that the modern political media landscape has totally transformed. And if you're the political leader, part of your job now, part of your responsibility is endlessly to be making the weather. And that's what he does. And I think that a lot of our politicians are still trapped in the mode of, well, here's a press release, let's brief the press, let's get it into a couple of the broadsheets, let's get him onto the main radio station, let's get him, Trump just cuts through all that stuff. And I think the ones that this is again to go back to Mark Carney. I think he's shaping his own narrative, and it's coming out in a way that people can feel it and sense it, and it's more than an old-fashioned form of politics. So I think that, and the point about reform, this is one of the great cons of our time. So there's Nigel Farage, who's led all these different kind of right-wing parties. And when the history books get written, Brexit, which, as I say, I think has been a complete disaster, but it's a deeply consequential event in our history, okay? And when those history books get written, I think the three key figures are going to be David Cameron, who called the referendum to try and keep his party together, Boris Johnson, who led the official campaign, and Nigel Farage, okay? Now, Cameron and Johnson are kind of off the pitch. Nigel Farage has somehow gone from leading something which has taken 5% out of our economy and made people poorer and made us less influential in the world, and he's currently being talked of as the next prime minister, and that's very, very Trumpian. Yes. Because he is managing to, using this very different way of communicating, he is managing for now to evade responsibility for really bad stuff that he's done. I mean, take January the 6th is one of about 100 events, scandals, situations that would have destroyed any previous American politician. So is that about Trump, or is it about the fact that the world has changed? I think it's about both.
Yeah.
The world has changed. The public, on the one hand, they're more demanding, but on the other hand, when they feel that they are part of a political tribe, they are more forgiving. And one of Keir's problems, because he hasn't had a long history in politics, I think less so Albo, because he's been around for so long. Trump has a tribe, okay? He has a tribe, and whatever he does, when he said I could go out and shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and my people wouldn't care, he's absolutely right about that. It's mind-blowing, but it's true.
Do you know also, the figure that Starmer reminds me most from an Australian comparative perspective is Kevin Rudd. Kevin Rudd took Labor back into government nationally after 11 and a half years in opposition, when the Labor Party tore itself apart. We went through 10 years of existential crisis and angst. He was probably, I don't think he should have replaced Kim Beazley. Kim Beazley was a good, decent man and centrist mainstream Labor leader. But I understand the argument that Rudd was very much in the Starmer mould. He presented as a small c conservative. Keir has Sir in front of him, the hints in the name. He was reassured. They both reassured the mainstream electorate, but Rudd wasn't tribal Labor, and he came to politics late as well and didn't get the tribal nature of the ALP, or a very intelligent man. He probably did understand that and just thought he could ride roughshod over the top of that, and that didn't work. And he was dispatched by his own party within 2.5 years. So really strong parallels there. That's not to say, I looking from afar, I think the worst thing that UK Labor could do would be to roll Starmer. One, because I don't see a super credible alternative candidate, and the message it sends to the electorate that we spent all of this time in opposition, getting ourselves together, purging the party of the Corbyn momentum crowd, that epic fight which Starmer led with Morgan McSweeney, who's obviously exited stage left or stage right, depending on your perspective. It just wouldn't be worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I know Kevin Rudd reasonably well, and I'm not sure I buy some of the parallels. I think they're very, very different people. I think that I think, although you say, as you say, Kevin maybe doesn't have that deep-rooted history, I think he's very, very political, and he's got a deep sense of political instinct. Whereas I think Keir sometimes doesn't want to be that political. He wants partly to be seen as a technocrat who can just sort of get stuff done. I think the other difference, though, is that, I mean, one of the most I like your politics, and I've always enjoyed kind of following it, what have you. But that documentary, The Killing Fields, is one of the brutal things I've ever seen in my life. And I don't, and I think your politics is different. You've got more of a sense of let's get the next guy in and what have you. We don't. If you think about it, you know, Neil Kinnock, when he was leader, 2 elections. How many Australian leaders have been allowed to lose 2 elections? When Jeremy Corbyn was leader, I mean, okay, there was quite a lot of people who were agitating, what have you, but we don't roll them like you guys do. Where I agree with you, though, I think that right now, I think given that one of the challenges Labour have got is people thinking, oh, this is just as messy as the last lot. The thing that was really messy about the last lot was the constant churn and the constant change. And so it was interesting, for example, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, when she was under pressure, and the thing that saved her in a way was the markets basically saying, we're fed up of all the kind of instability. Can we just, whatever it is they're doing, can we just keep with it for a bit? So the other thing I'd say about Keir, I mean, I know him pretty well. He's got a resilience about him that you need in the modern age. I mean, it's really interesting. He's had a really rough ride. He had no honeymoon at all. Okay, he had no honeymoon at all, and yet you look at him. I saw him the other day. He doesn't look tired. He doesn't look too stressed. And I think that's the other thing I think you need in modern politics. You've just got to, there's a lot you've got to roll with and you've got to keep going. Now, where I think the challenge is going to come is it going to be possible to get from where he is now with poll ratings that, their current poll rating is about the size of the lead that we had for an awful lot of the time that Tony Blair was in Prime Minister, particularly in the first term. We were double figure leads in the polls pretty much the whole way through. Different era, but in terms of your mindset and your confidence, that's a problem. But I think he can wear that. And on the one hand, what you just said about there's no kind of obvious alternative, that's a bad thing in what it says about the gene pool from which politics is going to take its next generation of leaders. But it's a good thing if you're the guy, if you're there and you're the guy who's just trying to keep the show on the road.
If you're the point you made earlier about the media ecosystem and how rapidly it's changed, I think that whether it's UK Labor or whether it's the political show here in this country, they have actually not adjusted to that new paradigm. There are more people that will listen to your content, for example, than actually watch the 6 o'clock news here in this country. Your podcast is number 1 in Australia, and they probably will watch that before they will watch political news on the ABC. And you still have their offices are built for that legacy media operation. Their comms day, whether it's Keir Starmer's office or whether it's Albanese's office or premiers here in this country, they're more worried about what do the pictures and images look like at 6 o'clock news. And we know through our research that the vast majority of people are now avoiding news unless it lines up with their view, and they consume the news through their own ecosystems. So whether it's listening to potties, whether it's going online and following someone that you actually you trust for political news. But overall, we could go into your point about Trump's got these scandals and it doesn't seem to touch his base. Seeing a bit of that here in this country too. Like we live in Victoria, and there's this scandal around a union, the CFMU, which is a construction union, big scandal, lots of political noise around it. The media are giving it the full bench press for like a full month. Labor's parliament didn't move.
The latest episode we've done, I've talked about how reform, I mean, there are so many scandals related to reform, but a combination of a biased right-wing media that is sort of thinking, well, maybe this is the horse we're going to back, alongside the point I made earlier that Farage has a tribe,
yes,
means that he doesn't get harmed as much by these scandals. Added to which, because he's who he is, and there's a little bit like Trump, some of them are priced in. But we're talking some pretty serious scandals that barely touch the sides. His leader in Wales is now serving a 10-year jail sentence for taking bribes from Russia to parrot Kremlin talking points in the European Parliament, right? Now, and Nigel Farage just comes and says, oh, I barely knew the guy. He appointed him as leader in Wales, right? And so this is, if that was Keir Starmer, it would probably finish him. So that's happening. And your point, you see, on the one hand, what you're saying is encouraging, in that, there is a desire, a yearning for some people for conversations like this that maybe are a bit deeper than you're going to get on the 6 o'clock news. But the downside of all that is, as you say, people creating their own media ecosystems, and then nobody gets into them. My point about political leaders, they have the opportunity to create their own ecosystems, which, provided the strategy and the content is strong enough, will touch everybody.
Yes,
they will. You still can reach out and touch everybody. And no, it's harder because, as we know, as soon as Keir Starmer speaks, as soon as Albanese speaks, there is a torrent of stuff. A lot of it coming from bots, a lot of it coming from the hard right, a lot of it coming from funded by Russia, all that stuff. But that's just part of the modern landscape, and you've got to find ways of dealing with that. So what I say is, I think it's harder, but it's not impossible. And there are lessons you can learn from Trump. In the end, you have to use whatever means and vehicles of communications you have to reach as many of these different echo chambers as you can get into. And if you're the leader of the country, you can do it.
I should say, Kozia, there's another good example. Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party, Alastair, is now comfortably ahead of the mainstream conservative forces, the coalition, Liberals plus Nationals. Comfortably ahead. He's clearly the large, according to opinion polls, a lot of water to go under the bridge until the next election. Clearly the major opposition party, according to polls. Pauline Hanson, well, she's been around since 96. So our sort of version of reform and MAGA politics actually came a bit earlier, and it's surging again now. Nigel Farage is a saloon bath, that's right. He's a political grifter from what I can see from afar. Hanson went to jail for electoral fraud. It was the late 90s, early 2000s, Kozzy. That didn't hurt her. Twice in our federal parliament, she's donned a full burqa in the just obscene behaviour. Yesterday, she was out and about, essentially saying quite explicitly explicitly saying there are no good Muslims, and yet, Elsa, she will still be invited on mainstream television, and she is impossible to ignore. It's Teflon coated stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't. And I think we go back to double standards. We we did some great interviews in Munich at the Security Conference. We interviewed Sarah McBride, the first transgender congresswoman, and she was brilliant on this thing about double standards, the way that the Republicans and the Democrats get treated differently by the media ecosystem. By the way, Gavin Newsom, he said, without Rupert Murdoch, there is no Donald Trump. Now, I don't like giving Murdoch all that power, but there's something in it. Without Fox News, I don't think that Trump makes it, because that did reshape the system. But I'll give you an example. You talk about Pauline Hanson there. last week, a guy called George Cottrell, who, even if you read the New Statesman, you probably never heard of, but he's a former aide to Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage has said he's like a son to me. And this guy has been to jail for money laundering offences. And last week he launched a book, How to Launder Money. And it was attended by Nigel Farage and all his team. You see, you're laughing, right? You're laughing. And that's the response they want, because they can say, look, there's old Alastair Campbell ranting on about the fact that give the guy a break, give the guy, he's having a second chance or whatever. But this is the party that is now getting all its money through crypto and through Iranian-based billionaires and all this stuff. So what they do, and this is why Trump is such a kind of menace to all of us really, is that they're changing the rules in plain sight by breaking them.
There are large parts of the electorate which like that. They like the transgressive nature of Trump, Farage,
100%.
Hanson, don't they, Cozzy?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the point about her remarks that there was no good Muslim, and one of my colleagues said, "Oh, look, that this could possibly hurt her in the polls." My response is, "No, it won't. It will. The people that are following her will think that will actually probably agree with that view. Of course, none of us do, but her followers would agree with that. And more importantly, if anyone tries to come out and deplatform her, it will be confirmation."
Yeah.
To that base that the establishment, the rigged system that I hate, that I want to tear down and burn down, that she's actually my champion to do that. That's the reason they're doing that to her, and that's a cycle.
I'll give you another one. By the way, I'm not going to call you Cozzy because I think Cosmos is such a great
Call
name.
him Kung Fu Cos.
Oh, I think Cosmos Samaras. You're not related to Samaras, the former Celtic player, are you?
No, I'm not. No, but there are many Samarases around. That's for sure.
I know there are. I know it's not the most. It's a bit like Campbell. Yeah. But here's another one for you. So in our constitution, right, you know that there is a government and a cabinet, and there is a shadow cabinet, and the shadow cabinet is formed from the main opposition party. So you know that Nigel Farage has got whatever it is, 8 MPs, okay? Most of them who've defected from the Tory party. He yesterday announced his shadow cabinet, okay? Consisting of himself and 4 people. And he called it the shadow cabinet, right? Now, it's not a shadow cabinet, but he's doing it. And of course, because I'm sort of, because I'm Trump derangement syndrome, which means you also have a bit of fraud, I sort of immediately, knowing what the reaction would be, say, you can't call yourself a shadow cabinet. But they love that because they want people like me to be saying, you're breaking the rules. Yeah. Because they want to be saying, we're smashing up the whole system.
That's right.
So I should have just kept my finger to itself, but there we are. So
it's about tearing down those institutions. It's that, and they're talking to a constituency that, as we touched on earlier on, have felt abandoned, economically ignored. Their lives have over a period of 10, 20 years, experienced significant economic decline, right? And this group of, whether they're in the UK or in Australia or in the US or northern parts of Europe, they do not support the institution because that compact has broken between society and them. So along come the disruptors, and again, the Westminster system. You have an opposition. These are traditions that we must comply with. He's very clever, right? So he's saying, no, I don't support those traditions which you hate.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's part of a strategy. But I think the only thing I'd say is that it doesn't mean that we should give up on defending the institutions that are part of our system. And we should believe in the rule of law. Trump deliberately flouts the rule of law. Farage flouts the rule of law. He's breached parliamentary rules on his own earnings 17 times. Yeah. Now it's deliberate. It's part of that thing that you were saying. But then when it gets to the way that they all attack the BBC, now I agree with a lot of your analysis of the media, but I still think the BBC is very important part of our soft power. It's a huge global brand and we should be a bit careful with it. But he also does it with the National Health Service. It was interesting yesterday in his shadow cabinet, there was no health position. And Wes Streeting, the health secretary, he said, he's obviously got no no shadow health secretary, because if he becomes prime minister, there'll be no NHS. So, you know, he opens himself to some decent, half decent attacks. But I do think as well the way that park social media for a moment, but the so-called mainstream media, just as politicians have really struggled to cope with this new world, so have the mainstream media.
Oh yeah,
I mean, they're totally trapped in a kind of sense of, you know, I think one of the reasons that our podcasts do so well is because people are sick of the formulaic nature of it. You know, here's a clip from one politician, here's a clip from another one, here's a guy coming in to tell you what they said. And the fact that it seems to me they can only ever deal with one big story at the same time. So they all get caught up on the same thing. You have literally billions of words being said about something that then gets forgotten. They move on to the next big thing. And I think the public are onto that. And so, but again, the populists, they attack it, we defend it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the point you make here is actually very important, because when we probably spoken last year to thousands of Australians, and every time we raise the media, the legacy media, their response, it's agendaed, it runs a particular political line, and I don't trust it. And I think it not only has that mindset developed very rapidly over the last 10 years, but I think this subscription model, I'm not sure what it's like in the UK, where you now have to purchase the news you want to read. So basically, you're not going to pay for something you don't agree with. And so what happens is they're funneling into their platforms a very particular type of reader, and they produce a very particular type of content to appeal to that reader. But our political class, I can tell you, here in Australia, the Labor Party still responds to what the Murdoch papers say. And as a researcher and a commentator, my response is, yeah, okay, it's important. What they have to say is important, but just be aware, the 34% that's voting for you, Albo, very few of them are reading those papers. In fact, I would say it's hard to find any, right? And
I think my thing about the papers is less, and I think this is why they do it. It's like talking to Gavin Newsom. He says Murdoch is suddenly setting up a paper in California. Right, to try and present California as a basket case, like the MAGA crowd do with London. And and on the one hand, it won't be about the readers; it's about the influence on the rest of the media. And my big beef with our broadcast is less that they're politically biased, although some are. Is more that they just take their agenda from newspapers, which the public don't anymore. And so I think that's what I mean about how both the politicians and the mainstream media, the legacy media, are trapped in a very old construct, and their efforts to break out of it just don't strike me as being very effective.
I think you're right. I've said it. I've written about this openly in Australia. There are things that we can learn from Trump and the MAGA movement. And you used the term establishment before. There's a good argument to be made that the centre left looks like part of the establishment, and that's why we're losing a good chunk of our base. Like, we don't seem to have the same, insurgent energy, zeal for doing stuff on, the housing, the intergenerational housing crisis, which is happening in Australia and the UK, the climate crisis, intergenerational equity on tax, and a range of issues, which you can understand why young people revolting everywhere.
Yeah, but I'll tell you the other thing, which I think is that they've always done better, and this is not a new thing, because I can remember Bill Clinton always used to say this, 20, 30 years ago. He said that these guys on the right are internationally way better organized than we are.
Yes, exactly.
And just as within, your Labour Party and our Labour Party, you will get endless kind of public discussion and debate, which is presented as kind of factionalism. So on the international level, the right let's just take the last few days, for example. There's Marco Rubio. He goes to Munich a year after J.D. Vance went there and basically said, you lot are a basket case and you don't believe in free speech and Vladimir Putin's not really a threat. And we all sit there going, what the fuck is he talking about? But that then sets the context for all the stuff we've seen, Greenland, Venezuela, all the stuff. That was the context. Rubio, who we always used to think, oh, he's the guy who will be the grown-up in the room. He goes and makes a nice, soft, touchy-feely speech, talks about the Beatles, talks about Mozart, talks about Christopher Columbus, but the political substance was identical to Vance. And then what does he do? After he's given us all these warm words about how much he loves Mozart and Michelangelo, gets on a plane and goes to Slovakia and then Hungary and stands alongside Orban and basically says to the Hungarian people, Donald Trump wants you to vote for this guy, right? Now, that is because Orban is part of this international network. And so is Farage, so is Le Pen in France, so is
and they're
the
supported by a
AfD
whole
in Germany.
network. It's not just the media. They're
So is
supported by a
Pauline
whole
Hanson.
network of think tank ecosystems as well. Really powerful
So
stuff.
is
Correct.
So is Pauline Hanson. It's the thing,
Exactly.
right? So she's now getting assistance, I'm convinced of this, from that network. You could see this in the material, in the communications, the way they are producing material. There is clearly a level of sophistication that's upped now.
And just on the double standards, so one of the stories, I'm sure it was getting as much coverage in Australia as it has been in the UK and everywhere else, the Epstein files, okay? So there's Vance, when they, a few years ago, saying the Epstein files are going to destroy the Democrats there. It comes out, there's all this stuff about Bannon, there's all this stuff about, all these figures on the right. Bannon saying that he can control all these parties in Europe, and if we can get this shift in the European Parliament, we can stop all regulation of crypto and the tech bros and all that stuff.
Yeah, Musk wanted to get to Epstein Island.
Exactly, right. But has that, and I know, but has that been a big story around the world? No. What's been the big story? Prince Andrew, Peter Mandelson. It's like, the right have just got this ability to kind of just brush stuff aside. Now, occasionally they fail. So as I say, the guy from Reform's leader in Wales, he's in jail. Okay, sometimes they get done, but they get away with an awful lot. And Steve Bannon, honestly, he's all over the bloody Epstein files, all over them. Trump's all over them.
So what does the left have to do then, Alistair? What does
Get
it
its
do?
act together.
Cos is big on hope. We need to offer people
good old
hope.
Cos.
I think we need to be a bit more insurgent. There are times where we have to sort of seize the ball and be more radical, particularly on housing and particularly on economic inequality. What does the mainstream left have to do to, given that we know that there's that inbuilt media bias, they've got the powerful global networks which are working to support right-wing, alt-right politics. Let's just call it alt-right politics because it's not mainstream right politics. What do we need to do on the left to seize the moment and to deliver for young people, because they're the people who can beat back this global alt-right movement? Well,
I think, listen, you're absolutely right. That is there is a real danger that we just get too sort of ground down by this. And of course, that is part of their strategy, is to try and make us feel nothing's possible. I've got to tell you, Albanese gave me hope. The fact that he came back and won when he was written off. Mark Carney gave me hope. There have been elections in Europe that actually, we had one recently in Portugal where the hard right looked like they might win. They lost 2-1 in the end. So you've got to find that hope. But in terms of how you generate it, I do actually think that, back to my point about the mainstream parties being locked in a very old way of thinking, this issue of intergenerational inequality, we have to break it.
Yes.
The only way we break it, I think, is actually by saying, my generation actually have had it too good for too long, and the younger generation are now paying a price. I would flip that big time. So, for example, I'm 68, I'm pretty well off. Why do I get free travel around buses and tubes in London? Crazy. Okay. Now, if a government were to do that, you would have a lot of noise coming at you, but you'd have a lot of younger people thinking, they're starting to listen, they're starting to hear. Yes. I think the thing about the other thing I would do, so I'm a really big fan of Peter Malinauskas in South Australia.
So we King Melly.
The minute I met him at the Adelaide Book Festival. Let's not talk about what's happened to that since. I met him
happy to.
at the Adelaide. I met him at the Adelaide Book Festival last year, and within 5 minutes, he said two things that I thought, why aren't we doing that? One was the social media, 16-year-olds, and the second was the political funding, right? Now, I don't know what, he strikes me as doing very, very well, and he's very, very popular. They are two of the reasons, because they both give people a sense that this guy gets the modern world and he's doing things to address that. The other thing I think we've got to do, we've got to stop being so defensive about what we believe. One of the things the right have done incredibly well is to weaponize they weaponize trans, they weaponize climate, they weaponize anything that they can define as woke. Fight back harder with a message that relates to why it's a better thing to be positive about other people, to believe that people should be free to do, to live their lives in the way that they want to, that it actually isn't a bad idea to try and stop the planet from sort of blowing itself up. Stop being so defensive. You probably know I'm a big football fan of Burnley, and I was at a Burnley game recently, and I was talking to one of the chairman of the team that we were playing against, and he's not a bad guy, he's probably a Tory, but he said, I want this government to succeed because I don't want to go down the hard right route. But he said every time I see them being interviewed, it's like they remind me of football managers who've just lost and they're trying to explain to you why.
Managerial.
And what he was capturing was a sense of us being defensive. You give hope by not being defensive and by saying there's a vision there of a better world. Come with me and fight for it. So I think a lot of this is about political style. And then in terms of the policy, you've spoken to where we need to be. A younger generation that for the first time in any of our lifetimes can no longer feel any confidence they're going to be better off than their parents. That's got to be fixed.
Correct. And that's the key for the left. And that is, we know that the right-wing populist movements will not address intergenerational inequality. They won't. So, and it's just sitting there like this great big prize for whether it's the Labor government in Australia or in the UK and across the Western world. And some of these, I would say, centre-left political movements have to be brave and go, you know what, we're going to upset some people who are a little bit older, but we're going to go for the prize. And in this country, because we've got a compulsory electoral system, the entire base is franchise. So when you are getting everyone from the age of 18 to 44 turn up to vote, and they're overwhelmingly voting for the parties of the left, well, guess what's going to happen if they keep doing that?
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
That's the key.
Correct. Listen, that was knocked into the back of the net like a Giorgio Samaras.
That's right.
From the left, and bang, there you go.
I didn't know you barracked for Burnley. I'm a Norwich City man. We've had a late season surge. Threatened with relegation to League One, but we're surging. You're still in the cup as well. We lost Mansfield. We lost to Mansfield in the cup of the weekend, and we're probably going to get relegated as well. So I want to do a big shout out to one of our mutual mates, the only James Thomas Copsey, JT, not JC, because he's not the Messiah, and he's also not a naughty boy. He's a river bloke, and. James, you were able to make this possible, so thanks, mate. Thank you, Kung Fu Cos, for your insights as always. I know you've probably got to get back to groups. You've also got to get Shmuel Sessions 104 has just dropped, Cos, so you need to listen to that. Thank you to Alastair. When are you in Australia next?
Well, I was probably going to go to the Adelaide Festival, but
that's cancelled.
That's off.
We can set up our own festival.
Yeah, maybe, but I'll get there too soon. I think the test match, the anniversary test match in Melbourne looks quite inviting.
It'd be great to meet you in the flesh. It's been wonderful having you on. Mate. Very generous of you.
All right.
Thank you to our listeners. Don't forget to refer a mate, a comrade, even a Tory scandal if they're part of your social circles, and let them know we're on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. But for now, it's goodbye and ciao and arrivederci.